up, so we'll get started, and as folks trickle in, we'll welcome them in with open arms. So welcome to the session, Creative Capital, Alternative Financing Models for Food Waste Solutions. For those of you who I haven't met yet, I'm Sharyn Murray, the Director of Impact Capital Programs at ReFed. Now, like maybe some of you in the room, this is my first summit, so I'm super psyched to be here. It's been really fun taking it all in. I can't believe we're only on really full day one of summit. There are many reasons to be passionate about reducing food loss and waste, and I've heard many of them already at this conference. So it could be just the visceral discomfort of seeing tons of perfectly good food being thrown out at the end of a restaurant shift, or the deep sadness, right, that we produce enough food to feed everyone, and yet 1 in 7 of our neighbors are going hungry, and unfortunately, potentially more by the day. I came to the space from more of a top-down perspective. That's just how I think about things. And there were 3 factors that really drove me to want to focus on this problem and its solution. The first is impact. Many levers of impact relevant to food loss and waste, but if we're looking at climate alone, Project Drawdown lists reducing food loss and waste as the #1 climate solution. Not the #1 climate solution in food and ag, the #1 climate solution. The second area is just its tractability or solvability. We know the solutions, many of them are in the room here today, and this is a reasonably non-controversial, right? Nobody's arguing we need to throw out more food. And then third, and we were just talking about this at our speaker table, is neglectedness. Just the much lower attention and the much lower amount of capital flowing into the space versus what we need to really drive impact. And that last piece, the too little capital, is what we're aiming to address in this session today, at least in a small way, right? Moving towards the solution. How many of you in the room are the solution providers? So the innovators, the nonprofits, the for-profits doing the hard work of reducing food loss and waste? Raise of hands. Amazing. The session's for you, so we're super excited you're here. Now, raise your hand again if you've got all the capital you need. You are all set. I was hoping there'd be like one that we could all glare at. No? Okay. So, we're gonna see what we can do about that. In addition to there being too little overall capital flowing into the space, I think many of us have also just looked in too narrow of places for capital. I know I, at least for one, thought for a long time that the sole sources of capital for nonprofits, grants and donations, for for-profit companies, those really looking to grow is venture capital, right? I suspect I'm maybe not alone in that. But luckily, that's very much not the case. We have 4 wonderful speakers today. They're gonna tell us about new innovative sources of impactful capital that go far beyond the grants, donations, and venture capital, although of course we love all of that funding as well. So here's how we're gonna do that. I'm gonna call up one speaker at a time. They're gonna come on up, I'm gonna introduce them. They're gonna tell you about the type of capital they're representing. And yes, we've got our wonderful speakers there. The type of capital they're representing, what an ideal recipient profile looks like, success factors, barriers to entry, and potential next steps that everyone in the room here, I hope, can take as soon as they're done with Summit. Maybe after you catch up on your emails, right, like get all this done, but after that, you can hopefully take an actionable next step. For any funders in the room, and I don't know if I've got any, but for any that, we've got some, perfect, see you, Shirley. I hope that this session can also help you think about how you can use your capital more efficiently, more effectively, more creatively to drive the kind of impact that you want to see. So if you haven't already, I'm sure you all have, please mute your phones. We're gonna record this session so it'll be available after Summit as well for you. And I'm gonna grab my notes here so I can introduce our first speaker, Andy Levitt, and share all of his accomplishments accurately. So Andy, feel free to come on up. Welcome him, please, everyone, and I'll tell you a little bit about him. Thank you. All right, so Andy is the founder and CEO of Brightly, a company transforming food waste into verified climate action while supporting food insecure communities. Andy is a serial entrepreneur passionate about health and sustainability and thrives at the intersection of impact and innovation. He finds his greatest joy in creating something from nothing. It says here that ironically, the 3 words you fear most are some assembly required. I feel that. While he's not working, you'll usually find him listening to the Grateful Dead and spending time with his family. Andy lives in the Boston area. So Andy's gonna be telling us about carbon credits. Show of hands, who here has heard of a carbon credit before? Wonderful. Has anyone sought a carbon credit for funding? Okay, perfect. Anyone secured carbon credits for funding? Okay, we've got like this was our answer. All right, so we're gonna see if we can get those numbers up with Andy's chat. So here you go.
Thanks, Sharyn. Nice to be with everybody here today. And as I was thinking about coming to this event, I was thinking about my last company. I pride myself on being an entrepreneur, and the last one I had was called Purple Carrot. And if anybody said, "Hey, Andy, what is Purple Carrot?" I could just give them 4 words, right? I could say plant-based meal kit. And most everybody would get it, right? Like they understood what that was. With Brightly, I do not have that luxury. And fortunately, I've got maybe 4 or 5 minutes with you all to explain what Brightly is, what we do, and really who we're created to support and try to make an impact in this funding environment. So I join you from Boston, and let's see, there we are. So, I thought I could just ground it by looking at what was happening in Boston, in my neck of the woods, and the leading food bank there, and the headline that they face federal funding cuts. And it didn't really take much by way of a Google search to see that what's happening in my hometown is happening in your hometowns as well. And this is an issue that we're seeing nationally, and there is, whether you see it as shocking headlines or now this has become standard for you to appreciate the dramatic funding challenges that food rescue organizations and those in this ecosystem are facing because of the administration's funding cuts and the plans that are on the table right now. And so it's really concerning, and hopefully Brightly can play a role in changing that trajectory. So to help bring this concept to life, I'm going to share an example of sort of my imaginary friend here, a fictitious person, though her story is quite authentic. And so let's take Jen from a food rescue organization, or what we would call an FRO, who's an executive director of a place called Nourish Now. And Jen's the executive director there, and she's got a staff, she's got volunteers. They rescue about 35 million pounds of food every year. They do really great work. They've got 3 trucks. 2 of them usually need to get repairs. And she's really struggling to find how to make her budget this year, and probably has a hard time even imagining next year or the year thereafter, because she's so focused on even just getting from here to there and doesn't really have a lot to go on, and so much stress and people to support with her work. Now, Jen has limited levers that she can pull on to try to create some change. And so, something like a federal funding grant is pretty much gone at this point, but maybe she can pull off some corporate contributions, some charitable donations. Those take a long time to get, especially the the corporate contributions, and charitable donations could be $5 or $10 from someone who wants to support that work. So it's a very slow and steady climb, and not one that happens quickly or easily, and takes a lot of mind share for sometimes very little return. The thing that Jen has going for her and her organization is data. And we see this across the board. And while Jen is a fictitious character, the data that I have on the screen is quite authentic, and it comes from one of our FRO partners. And I don't think there's anything on here that shouldn't be shared, but what you see is dates of acquisition of food that's been diverted away from a landfill to bring it to those who are experiencing hunger. It's the pallets, it's the donor, it's the food type. So we're able to find a way to monetize the data that Jen and her organization has to create some sustainable funding. And the way we do that, as Sharyn sort of signaled, is through the voluntary carbon market. And so I was happy to see that many of you in the room know what the voluntary carbon market is, and I can briefly touch on the concept of it if it would be helpful. But for our world, we're following the work of Verra, which is the leading registry for carbon credits, and there's a couple others that are doing really nice work across a range of different carbon projects. About 2 years ago, Verra released the first ever methodology to address avoided food loss and waste. It's called VM0046, and my company Brightly has been following that as the path forward to create carbon credits from avoided food loss and waste. Now, just to be clear, the voluntary carbon market has a whole range of participants and really great players. Some may be a little suspect, but by and large, there's a lot of great actors across wind, across solar, across forestry, wind stoves, or cook stoves rather. There's a whole host of different decarbonization projects. Ours is specifically focused on food loss and waste. So to try to keep this brief and simple to understand, and we can talk about it more in the breakout for those who wish. The model is that we work with Jen's organization, the FRO, and they share with us their data. That I gave you an example of what that looks like. And we've built this AI purpose-driven platform that can process through reams and reams, I mean, tens of millions of lines of data to make sense of what the food types are, what they're about, and how we connect it to EPA and USDA level databases to show the dry matter content of every single food that's been recovered and diverted away from a landfill to feed people. And in that process, we work with a third-party auditor in line with Vera's requirements to verify and to validate and verify the work that we're doing, to then turn that into carbon credits. And as many of you probably may know, a carbon credit is 1 ton of carbon dioxide, or in this case, a CO2 equivalent, which is methane, which, as you know, is this very near-term warming agent. And that type of CO2 has been avoided or removed from the atmosphere. And in our case, the methane has been avoided because instead of the food ending up in a landfill, it's ending up in people's mouths, which is great since they are hungry. And by turning that into a carbon credit, we can then sell those credits to corporations who may wish to use those carbon credits to offset their own emissions and reduce their own ESG targets. And we give the majority of that revenue back to the FROs, and that's where we can help with this kind of sustainable funding. So there's a lot of companies out there who are purchasing carbon credits, and these are just an example of well-known companies. That this is not to say this is like some, back alley kind of transaction, but this is rather quite a robust ecosystem in the voluntary carbon market. And I think these corporations are looking to acquire credits to both tell a powerful story about their commitment to addressing emissions as well as food insecurity, but also to address those emissions that they can't address themselves. So it's really important that we are focusing on sort of a very high integrity solution. And as a result, when we are able to do this, and you go back to Jen's organization, we're able to generate for them $84,000 in this example. She's able to buy 3 new trucks. They picked up a couple million pounds more worth of food, and they hired 2 new people to work in their organization. So it's really intended to be this catalytic funding for food rescue organizations, and hopefully that all makes sense and resonates. And if you're interested in learning more about how your food data could be translated into sustainable funding, you could see a glimpse of a dashboard that looks a lot like that. I'd love to talk to you afterwards at the breakout. So thank you so much for your attention, and hope that was interesting.
Thank you so much, Andy. And this breakout that Andy mentioned is something I meant to tell you all about, but I forgot. So I appreciate that you did that. So after our amazing 3 other speakers come up and chat with you, we're going to do small group breakout sessions. So essentially like in office hours, a really in-depth Q&A. So everyone in the audience will get to pick one speaker they want to hear more from. Andy's going to stay in here. The other speakers, we've got some rooms close by set up. I'll give all those instructions at the end of all the presentations. But just keep thinking right now as you hear them present who you really want to dig in with afterwards. So you'll get to go into a lot more detail. Okay, so Andy, that was super interesting. It's always exciting to see a new form of capital come to market and for this space. So really exciting to see what is next. Next up, we're going to have Swetha Krishnakumar. Swetha is the investments director on the impact investment team at Momentus Capital, which provides growth stage businesses and those that they serve with the capital and opportunities that they deserve. With a primary focus on healthcare and healthy food access, she works across the spectrum from relationship building with entrepreneurs and business owners, understanding businesses and their needs, structuring bespoke investment offerings, and serving as a partner through the life of an investment. Swetha has spent over 10 years on the impact investment and social entrepreneurship space in both the US and India. She is passionate about bringing creativity and community-rooted solutions to impact-aligned businesses and investors. Swetha is a proud native of Atlanta, Georgia, and now a proud transplant to Los Angeles. She has her MBA from Chicago Booth and degrees in industrial engineering and international affairs from Georgia Tech. Swetha, please come on up. So Swetha is going to walk us through profit and revenue share equity and debt structures that are non-dilutive and impact first. So again, by raise of hands, just to get a sense for the knowledge in the room, has anyone here ever heard of profit share, preferred equity, revenue share, mezzanine debt? Okay, Few, great. Anybody ever pursued that form of capital or something similar? Okay, anyone secured it? All right, I think this is gonna be a very worthwhile session, so over to you.
Awesome, thank you so much. Okay, great. Well, again, I'm Swetha Krishnakumar. Thank you all for attending. And I was glad to see so many hands raised. So hopefully this is somewhat familiar to a lot of you guys. Oh, oops. Okay, great. Just by way of background, I'm with Momentus Capital, which is a full-range impact-aligned financial services firm focused on supporting impact-aligned businesses, nonprofits, projects, things like that. I sit specifically on the impact investments team where we offer growth capital to impact-aligned for-profit businesses. And kind of as Sharyn mentioned, what we do and what we focus on is providing sort of an ability to fill the gaps in the capital markets and provide more optionality and more flexibility to borrowers and companies. We sit at sort of a hybrid structure between traditional equity and venture capital as well as traditional debt. And what that looks like for us is profit share or revenue share structures. Essentially being able to flex with the growth of the business without actually taking ownership of the business. So in our structures, we take zero ownership of the business. We want to keep that with the owners themselves. We're also a little bit different from traditional debt as well. We are unsecured. We don't need any collateral or asset coverage. We don't require any personal guarantees, and we're often pretty covenant light as well. And so in our case, while there are a lot of versions of this kind of variable funding structure, in our case, the way it works is we take a percentage of profits or revenues on a quarterly basis, along with a fixed kind of interest or guaranteed dividend payment on a monthly basis, all of which is tied to an agreed upon multiple on invested capital. And the idea behind that is that it increases sort of alignment and transparency between both us and the company. Everyone knows exactly what the return target and return that we're headed towards is. And we really only succeed if the business succeeds. We only get our return if the business succeeds. We have no other form of recourse. And so that's sort of how we want to be in partnership with the businesses that we work with. Beyond that, what we find is a good fit for our offering is companies that have at least $4 to $5 million in revenues and at least $1 million in EBITDA. So certainly very much growth stage. There are a lot of revenue-based financing offerings at kind of the earlier stage, startup stage, and things like that. But we wanted to make sure that we fill out the gap in getting companies that have grown a little bit, grown to a certain stage, but really need the additional capital to grow and expand, and perhaps don't have the assets to go to traditional bank debt, and don't also have the kind of J-curve-like growth that venture capital is looking for, and yet there's a lot of growing businesses that are doing great work in their communities, and so we want to be able to support those. In terms of how we think about our offering and why consider kind of a variable pay structure, the benefits here are that, like I mentioned, you don't have to give up any equity and you also aren't tied to purely fixed debt payments. It also allows you to kind of raise sufficient funds even if you don't have, like I said, a hockey stick growth curve that venture capital is often seeking, and you're sort of driven to a certain level of growth that maybe lets you or leads you to deprioritizing things like profitable sustainability, impact, things like that. It also gets you growth capital even if you don't have enough asset coverage, and then also if you don't have personal assets to put up a personal guarantee as well. Like I mentioned, the revenue or profit share does scale up with the business performance. So like equity, it's meant to support where the business is at without, again, taking any ownership, and really focuses on that aspect of what we offer here. I touched a little bit on what types of businesses are a good fit for what we have to offer size-wise. Beyond that, in terms of use of capital, the key focus that we have is on supporting that growth, whether it's organic or inorganic growth. On the inorganic side, we support a lot of business acquisitions by independent sponsors or search funds who are looking to be able to grow businesses themselves from that perspective. In our case, where our capital isn't a great fit is for refinance, recapitalizations, project finance, or real estate, or businesses outside of the US. Obviously, there are other growth capital providers out there who would have their own criteria. This is just specific to us. In terms of the way we think about fund fit, in our case, we think about impact in 4 different verticals. Each deal only needs to meet one of those. The first one is ownership, so that's either kind of the demographics of the ownership or employee ownership, so co-ops, employee-owned trusts, ESOPs. We're relatively flexible in how we think about this as long as there's intentionality and kind of operating control with that ownership group. It doesn't necessarily need to be 50% plus ownership or 100% ownership. The second category is community development, which is relatively broad in our case, so businesses located in lower moderate income census tracts or driving impact within their internal or external communities, either through better pay or targeted hiring programs, things like that. And then the last 2 are businesses driving healthy food access, which I think overlaps and coincides a lot with preventing food waste or reducing food waste. And then the last one is healthcare access. So those are kind of the 4 focus areas, although each business only needs to meet one of those. But that's how we think about kind of driving impact. I wanted to end with an example of an actual deal we did with a company that does a lot in the food waste reduction space. We invested in Hungry Harvest last year. They're based in Baltimore, and they focus on delivering rescued produce across the Baltimore, DC, Maryland, Virginia areas. An area that they've grown into quite a bit over the last few years is the food as medicine space. So delivering produce as a prescription sort of service for patients with chronic illnesses or other challenges that might benefit from access to healthy food. We invested with a revenue share mezzanine debt investment last year and hoping to be able to continue to support their growth. With that, I'll just end right there. Excited to continue the conversation in the breakout sessions and happy to share kind of where our capital can be a good fit, but also be kind of transparent where we might not be a good fit, but where other alternative sources could be a better one. We recently raised last year our primary source of funds, the Equitable Prosperity Fund. That's a $171 million fund we're actively deploying. So if you or anyone else is seeking, happy to have the discussion or again, point you in the right direction for someone else. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Oh, good. All right. Thank you, Swetha. That's so helpful. It's always exciting to see that we captured kind of the right topics, right? Folks maybe don't know as much, can learn more, and can really access that capital. So thank you so much. Okay, next we've got Rasika Parkhi. So Rasika is the manager of impact investments at CapShift. She sits on the investment research team and leads the firm's impact reporting practice. Her work focuses on sourcing, reviewing, and measuring the impact of opportunities to help activate more capital to drive social and environmental change. She's motivated by finding pathways to unlock philanthropic capital through innovative tools like recoverable grants, which she'll be discussing, to support high-impact organizations. Prior to CapShift, Rasika worked as a fundraising and strategy development associate at educational nonprofit Teach for India, where she supported the NGO's financing strategy and worked with mission-aligned foundations, corporates, and high-net-worth individuals. Rasika began her career as a financial and business process auditor at KPMG. She holds a Master of Public Administration degree from Columbia University with a focus on innovative finance for social impact. Rasika, please come on up. And as I previewed, Rasika is going to talk about recoverable grants. So who here has heard of a recoverable grant? Okay, actually fewer than I expected. So again, we're on point here. Has anyone here sought a recoverable grant for funding? All right, well then, we're very excited to have you chat.
Here you go. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I do this and have this exact conversation on a daily basis for like 30, 40 minutes on Zoom calls with individual teams. So now my timing is highly scrunched and my audience is so much larger. So I hope I continue to deliver. My name is Rasika, as Sharyn introduced. I am a manager of impact investments at CapShift. CapShift is an impact investment platform. We work with private asset owners, private foundations, charitable organizations, 45 plus of them, to help them really build impact investment portfolios aligned with the impact themes that donors and investors find they're most passionate about. We recently celebrated a milestone of having mobilized $1 billion in impact investments since the 7 years that we started working. The organizations that we work with have deployed capital over the past 7 years across hundreds of organizations. They might be funds, nonprofits, companies, and they span all 17 SDG thematic areas. I want to introduce, first of all, just the scale of philanthropic capital that's out there. There's US dollars 1.5 trillion in global philanthropic capital, the largest portion of which sits in the United States and in Europe. 150 billion of this is deployed annually or granted out to organizations. Think about where these assets sit, right? Primarily two places. One is private foundations, and second is donor-advised funds. Private foundations are quite a common structure. Folks understand how those work. Donor-advised funds, on the other hand, may not be that popular, I suspect. They're a charitable giving tool where individuals can make contributions to the donor-advised fund. They will receive a tax advantage as soon as they make the donation, but they can continue to grant out this capital from the donor-advised fund over the next multiple years into organizations that they find highly impactful, hence donor-advised. These organizations deploy capital across three ways, I would say. Traditional grants or donations, which we all understand fairly well. There's investments that these charitable organizations can make within the IRS guidelines, which we call program-related investments, and recoverable grants, which are a quite new tool and not as popular and well understood. Traditional grants or donations, as we understand them, have their own limitations, right? Once granted out, that capital is gone. Donors are not able to retain the corpus of their charitable assets. Program-related investments have all these requirements that I've listed here for them to be compliant with IRS guidelines. Therefore, private foundations and DAFs will require to undergo financial and legal due diligence, monitor this investment over the often longer life, 10, 12-year tenures, and have a lot of sort of onerous documentation and subscription requirements as they make these investments. These, I believe, are really the roadblocks in holding back a lot of philanthropic capital that is stagnated and sitting on the sidelines, only a fraction of which is deployed to organizations that do highly impactful work, like many of you sitting in this room. Donors and nonprofits need to work together to build sort of innovative financial tools that bridge these gaps and open up a lot of the capital that is sitting here unlocked in charitable assets. Recoverable grants may be one of those tools, right? Recoverable grants are a form of grant, as it suggests, that once donated out, donors can receive that capital back if the underlying nonprofit is able to achieve its impact goals. It's not a loan, it's not an investment, it doesn't require the sort of onerous documentation that a standard investment would require. It is highly, highly impact aligned and much easier to execute and monitor versus an investment. So, who can raise capital via recoverable grants? By virtue of the types of organizations, foundations, and donor-advised funds can support, US-based 501c3s are the most easiest and primary recipient of recoverable grants. If you're a non-US-based charitable organization or a for-profit entity, the easiest pathway for you to raise recoverable grants is to partner with a US-based 501c3 organization for them to be your intermediary. This step to ensure that you're using the proper legal entity is the first step in seeking recoverable grant capital. The next step is to clarify your recovery model. What capital are you going to use to return capital or recover capital back to donors? These are not the only three models, certainly, but the most common ones CapShift has seen over the 5 years since we've been deploying recoverable grant capital. To bridge a funding gap, recoverable grants can be used to continue your programs while you await other forms of committed capital, like, say, a government grant that's already been signed, but you're waiting for the cash to come in. Recoverable grants can bridge that gap. You can use the recoverable grants to scale a revenue-generating project. Nonprofits don't generally raise growth equity. That's not a tool available for nonprofit structures. Recoverable grants can help you grow your team, scale your revenue-generating model, and really build capacity as you succeed and grow in your business. The other one, which is definitely one of my favorite use cases of recoverable grants, is to push the boundaries of highly impactful but highly risky solutions. CapShift works with a nonprofit organization that's providing loans to BIPOC farmers so that they can create pathways to land ownership. Commercial capital we all know that has ignored this area. Even venture capital finds areas like this highly risky, and hence capital is not deployed to those areas. Recoverable grants can be an excellent tool for this case. Finally, set terms. Similar to an investment, set the terms that you would use to raise recoverable grants. Ask yourself, what is my overall fundraising goal? What is the minimum grant size I'm able to accept so that my operational work isn't too burdensome? What's the expense that I'm incurring in raising this recoverable grant? Am I going to absorb that expense, or am I going to charge fees to donors for it? When do I expect to recover capital, and what is the term at the end of which or during which I will recover capital? There is no set of golden terms. CapShift over the 5 years has seen a lot of organizations raise recoverable grants through a varied set of terms. What is most important is for these terms to be highly aligned with the underlying recovery model that we just spoke about. And obviously, impact prioritization will remain important for donors and for your organizations. I'll give you a quick example. Say a smallholder farmer has raised a 2-year recoverable grant to bridge the gap between the inputs they require in year 1 and the revenue they will generate after selling their harvest in year 2. Recoverable grants will help fund the inputs that they use, enable them to plant their crops, harvest their crops, sell them in the market, generate revenue, and return capital to donors. What has happened here is that not only has the farmer not had to go to the commercial banks and access expensive forms of capital or be rejected at the source, but the donor has also received their capital back that they may recycle 2 years later into some other impactful organizations, or the same farmer for a new harvest cycle. I've said a lot of good things. There's obviously certain limitations to using this tool. Without a recovery model, it's hard to raise recoverable grants. Not all donor-advised funds and foundations are set up to deploy recoverable grant capital. Might be costly or misaligned if you're using an intermediary that isn't aligned with your goals. And by virtue of the recovery nature, you will require some impact reporting and financial management resources to monitor the grant over its life. All to say that there is a lot of financial philanthropic capital waiting to be deployed. Call to action for philanthropists and their advisors is to see whether this tool fits in your portfolios. Call to action for nonprofits and for-profits is to assess the suitability of this for your models and bring this up the next time you're having conversations with your donors. Thank you very much. I'm excited to speak with you later.
Thank you so much, Rasika. And bringing us home, we've got Joe Evans. Thank you, Joe. So Joe is the Senior Social Impact Investment Officer at Kresge Foundation and a Senior Fellow for Climate Finance at the Opportunity Finance Network. At Kresge, he spent the last 5 years working to ensure that markets left behind by traditional financial actors benefit equally from new technologies and resources that improve buildings, create energy independence, boost resilience, and when possible, reduce costs through solar generation. Joe joined Kresge in 2014, and prior to that, he worked for more than a decade with a nationally recognized consulting firm specializing in organizational development, nonprofit business planning, social investing, and multi-funder initiatives. Joe also serves as an executive at a community action agency, and most recently was the director of lending for a CDFI focused on expanding housing and educational choices for persons living with disabilities and their families. He earned a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Southern Connecticut State University and an EMBA from Columbia Business School. So Joe's going to be talking to us about the power of loan guarantees as a powerful credit enhancement tool. Has anyone here heard of loan guarantees? Wonderful. Has anyone pursued capital backed by a loan guarantee? All right, I saw like one hand. Okay, so again, Joe, I think your contribution is going to be much appreciated. Take it away.
Thank you. Great. So, hi, everybody. I wanted to just start by saying a little bit about the Kresge Foundation. Last year was our 100th anniversary. Kresge is a $4 billion private foundation. That makes us kind of a small, large one. It's like a top 20, but working nationally, it's kind of a smaller private foundation. We were founded by Sebastian Kresge. He was an entrepreneur and innovator. If anyone remembers or has seen Little House on the Prairie and you go into the Olson's shop, that's what stores used to be like. Most of the products were behind the counter. His big innovation was to let people walk around and touch products. And he, Woolworth, a couple others, had this idea early last century, maybe 500 stores in 6 years, something like that, started in Detroit. Years later after his death, through some corporate restructurings, it became Kmart. So the K in Kmart stands for Kresge. We work in 7 different grant-making areas: health, human services, education, arts and culture, and environment. 2 place-based teams, one focused on Detroit, one, our American Cities program, works nationally on urban issues, but has a particular focus on Memphis, New Orleans, and Fresno. I work on the social investment team in the lower right corner there. And someone on our team is kind of assigned with each of the grant-making teams to understand how capital markets intersect with the challenges or solutions that they're trying to advance. We make loans, program-related investments, as you just heard a little bit about, equity investments, which also count as PRIs, and then unfunded guarantees. And it's the guarantees I'm going to talk to you some about. So foundation balance sheets are very attractive to credit providers. They're nearly 100% equity, and their boards have typically, part of their bylaws or their purpose is to exist forever. So it makes them a very attractive credit. But they only give away 5-6% of the total amount each year. And so there's a lot of, potential in what we sometimes call renting out the balance sheet. So to provide credit enhancement to someone else whose balance sheet isn't as strong, trying to test new ideas or scale capital or work in an area that's perceived as risky or sometimes really is risky. I put these other logos at the top. So some years ago, we've been encouraging other foundations to use these tools as well as program-related investments. So one sort of aside is that there were, I think, 30 foundations or foundation folks here at the conference. There's more than that active in the space. If you work with local or regional or, foundations who you would like to encourage to use these tools, we'd be happy to consult with them or give advice or show examples or case studies of how they can make the loans or equity investments that count as charitable investments or the guarantee tool. And so some years ago, maybe in 2020, we convinced a group of maybe a dozen or 15 other foundations to pool their resources into this community investment guarantee pool. And it's run by Locus, locusimpact.com, I think. The Kresge makes guarantees, other foundations make guarantees, but the CIGP still has a fair amount of capital available for guarantees and about another year left to originate them. The sizes range, as a percentage, typically a higher percentage, above 25 or 30%. You're only going to get that from a foundation who tends to be place-based, a larger community foundation, a family foundation that cares about one particular place, and that tends to be more project-specific. So some, food distribution hub needs a new cooler. They don't have the collateral for it. A foundation backs the loan, kind of like co-signing a car loan or I just recently co-signed a lease for my college-age student. So it's the same kind of concept. For the work that we do, we tend to offer coverage in the rate of 20%, tends to be our most typical. And a typical transaction This is like Brightly's example. Urban Farming Group does not exist, but they received a grant commitment for $1 million to implement a food composting program. But the grant terms are reimbursable, so they have to make the expense and then get it reimbursed. But they don't have $1 million to spend, so they went to a local bank. But they don't really have much in the way of assets. They own their land, but the bank's leery about putting a lien on that because they don't want to be in the paper. You know, they're never going to be able to take that just publicly, you know, from a public relations standpoint. So the local community foundation says, well, we'll guarantee that any losses up to the first 25%, if you can't recover, we'll pay it back. And that gets the bank to say yes. And that's kind of at a project level, that's kind of a standard structure. Other structures that we would have would be like a lending organization that wants to raise capital from a bank. And the bank is like, well, your transactions are really small, it's hard to monitor them all. You lend in communities that suffer from disinvestment, and we think that that's a credit risk. So then we would make a partial guarantee to sort of get that credit provider over the hump. Most recently, this isn't a food example, but the most recent one I did of size was this group called SunWealth, invests in solar panels and battery storage systems, and project size might average $500,000. Well, Goldman Sachs was interested to provide capital to them, but their smallest project's like $10 million. And it was difficult for them to feel comfortable in the underwriting at that small project level. And so we provided a 20% guarantee to them, and they provided $50 million in capital to SunWealth. So the ranges are, you know, can be all over the place from the small project level to someone who's providing capital for other uses. And you know, this number and the stuff on the left is from ReFed's website. You know, their analysis has said that this is just in the U.S. It says that with about $16 billion of annual investment, they can make all sorts of good stuff happen. I forget, with $60 billion in return. I meant to bring the numbers with me, but you know, many millions of tons of diverted food waste, and the green section of this, which is the majority of it, those are the types of financing that the unfunded guarantees would help facilitate. The orange and the orangey, I think it was philanthropy, and the blue government. But you know, those tend not to benefit from these guarantees, although occasionally the federal government has accepted them. But venture capital, private equity, in particular bank capital, is the type of capital that this kind of guarantees would be useful for. So it's clear that to get from, Sharyn told me last year was $1 billion was invested in this space last year. So to get from 1 billion to 16 billion is quite a bit. So I think helping to encourage your foundations that work in this space to provide these types of guarantees, or the PRIs or other kind of capital products that we're hearing about today, there's a lot of work to do there. So I'll stop there. I'd be happy to chat with anybody else after this session that's is interested, and I'll turn it back to Sharyn.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, so I learned a lot. I hope everyone else here has learned a lot, and the learning is going to continue. So first of all, let's give another big round of applause for our amazing speakers sharing their expertise with us. Thank you. So here's when we're going to break out, get to move a little, at least for some of you. So those who want to hear more from Andy on carbon credits, you actually get to stay in this room. So you don't get to walk, but it's the simplest directions. For those who want to learn more about profit and revenue, share, equity, and debt financing, Swetha is going to be in room 501, Chihuahua. And my colleague Alejandro, he's in the back right there waving a little something around, paper around. You can follow him. You're going to take a left out of the room, take a left, hug the wall, and just kind of walk straight on through. He'll lead the way. With Rasika, I'm going to have my colleague Rishi. He's also in the back. Now he's waving a sign. You're in room 505, Keats. That is take a left and walk all the way down. And then I'm gonna be with Joe, and we're gonna head to room 505, SOC. We're gonna make a left, hug the wall, and not walk quite as far. So in a moment, we're gonna break out and go do that, and just wanna take one more second to close this out. So look, we have a lot of capital we need to move, and we know that moving the capital, solving food waste, not a solo mission, right? We need collaboration between funders, between solution providers. We've seen from the speakers today that that's not only possible, but it's a really powerful lever for us to use. And so as you enter these small group discussions, don't just go with like a question ask. That's great. Please go ask questions. But really think of yourself as an active collaborator that might be able to partner with those in the room in the coming years ahead and really drive towards the change we want to see. So again, thank you. Go continue the conversation. Enjoy the small group breakouts. Thank you again for being here.